So for this project, I'm gonna turn a box into a key storage unit. So this box, why this box? Because it's it's a box. I've had this box for a few months already. It was a jigsaw puzzle, as you can see. This one specifically, a 1,000 pieces puzzle that I completed in like 2 days. It was really good. And I'm gonna use this box because it's really sturdy. I really like the material that puzzle boxes are made. This is the base that I'm using for this project. So, wait. So my goal is to make it so that it can open like a little door. Oh my god, I cannot hold this. So yeah, it would be like this, and you can open it somehow. And then you can hang all your keys on this part. My goal is to turn this box into an art piece that looks like the outside of a house. And it's gonna be in the inside of my house, so I don't know. I thought that it would be, I don't know where I got the inspiration, but I wanted to make it into an Italian looking village house. And it's gonna have windows and a door. And I want to have lighting on the inside of the house. So in the night I can turn the lights on and it will look like there's people living inside the house. This would be the front of the house and this would be one of the sides of the house. I also looked up the usual heights of buildings on the internet and it turns out most houses are like 6 to 8 meters tall. And so this house is supposed to be 8 meters tall. This would be the first floor and it's supposed to be 3 meters tall. This would be the second floor. It's also 3 meters tall. This over here is supposed to be the attic and it's only 2 meters tall. The first step was obviously tracing the design onto the box. And then I had to cut out the 3 windows and the door. For this I used an X-Acto knife and it was a lot harder than what it should have been. For some reason the X-Acto knife was not cutting through the material, but with scissors it was completely fine. So you can see the actual cuts were really messed up. The next thing I had to tackle was the roof. You see, a roof doesn't normally lay flat on top of the house, but a box does have a flat top. So what I had to do was cut the top of the box at a certain inclination, and that would allow me to have a roof tilted on top of the house. The next thing I did was cutting all the parts of the box that I didn't need, which in the part that was gonna be the door of the box, that meant absolutely all the sides, so I would only have a flat piece of cardboard. With the excess cardboard, I remove the top layer, which is the part that has the illustration, and I taped these rectangles together. I basically just created a big piece of cardboard because I didn't have a bigger piece. So I attached that to the top of the house and I cut the excess off on both sides. Later on, I will eventually add the individual roof tiles to make it look like a real roof. And this is what it looks like. It's starting to resemble a house, but not so much. So let's get on with the door of the box. Not the door of the house, the door of the box. So the first thing that I did on the door was working on the window holes, we could call it. I don't know if you've noticed, but windows and doors tend not to be completely flat on the facade of the house. There's usually a little bit of wall that goes inside the house, and then there's the actual window or door. And that's what I'm working on here. For that, I cut some long strips of cardboard and I attached them all around the border of the holes. I believe this gives the project a little bit of dimensionality and makes it look a bit more realistic and not just a box. Now it's time to recycle the cutouts from before. I took the door and the windows and removed the inner design of each one of them. As I said before, working with an X-Acto knife on this material was a nightmare. So it ended up looking really, really bad, and I had to figure out a way to cover up the mess. And so I used tape because it's the thing that I had around. And it ended up looking really bad, but trust the process. I promise in the end it will not look as bad, although at this point my motivation was really low. To make the door look a bit more like a door, I took the cutouts of the cutout and made them a tiny bit smaller so they would just fit inside the cutout, but with a little bit of an empty border around. I attached everything on a piece of cardboard, and this gave it a little bit of three-dimensionality to the door. I was inspired by actual doors that I saw on the street. The only thing I had to do was cut the excess off on every single side, and here I had a door. For the window blinds, I had a completely different design in mind, but I ended up settling for this one because I just couldn't manage to make the original one. I tried and I failed every single time because the material was just not right. To give it the look of wooden boards nailed together, I used thin strips of thin cardboard glued next to each other but leaving a little teeny tiny gap in between each other. You may notice that the glue has a weird consistency, and that is maybe because the bottle is like 10 years old. But anyway, it glued, so who cares? Cutting the excess was really satisfying. To give the window blinds a little more extra details, I added some horizontal strips of cardboard on top of everything, and I also cut out little pieces of toothpicks to make them look like the hinges of the blinds. For the door frame, I had a pretty fancy design in mind, so I wanted it to be made up of 2 columns and an arch made of stones on top. So I just looked up the names of the parts of a column, and this is called a shaft. So for the shaft of the column, I use pieces of wavy cardboard. For the capital of the column, I designed 2 L shapes, one bigger, one smaller. I cut them out multiple times so I could glue them all together and make a thicker, more sturdy piece of stone-like material. For the actual stones of the stone arch, I also used wavy cardboard in little squares. To create the texture of the stones, I used a paper mache-like goo. It was made of water, the really old glue that I shouldn't be using for this thing, and some toilet paper. I put a piece of this goo on top of each square of cardboard, and then I individually shaped each one of them. The next thing I made was a little staircase under the house door, and I made it using, you guessed it, more cardboard. My goal was just to fill out some of the vertical and horizontal space. I guess I was worried that if I didn't make the front of a house really busy, it wouldn't be realistic enough. The staircase proved to be very useful in the end. It now serves as the handle to open and close the door of the box. The balcony was very easy to make. I just used 4 rectangular pieces of cardboard of different sizes, and I glued them all together, one on top of the other. At some point during the project, I decided that I wanted the balcony to have a black and white checkered tile pattern, just because I saw it in someone's house. For that, I painted a piece of cardboard white and another piece of cardboard black, and I drew a grid on the back of each piece. And then I cut out dozens of black squares and white squares. I had to glue every single tile individually using the same glue and with a lot of patience, but it was really relaxing. There is a portion of sidewalk visible in front of the house, and I was inspired by this video on Pinterest and I decided to make it out of stones. For the stones, I used some wrinkled up egg carton. I cut it into little pieces with my fingers and I glued that on top of the cardboard. Then I cut off the excess of both the balcony and the sidewalk. The balcony also needs to have a railing. For that I use long strips of cardboard and a bunch of toothpicks. I had to individually paint every one of them black. And this is how I set up the toothpicks to let them dry. Once everything was dry, I cut all the toothpicks and the strips of cardboard into the shape and the size that I needed. And I also planned where I had to put every single toothpick, so they would have the same space in between each other. I glued all the pieces together and that's how I got the foundation for the railing. I've noticed that these balcony railings usually have some kind of ornaments at the bottom, which look like feet, and so I decided to replicate that with a few drops of hot glue, and I painted over it with black acrylic paint. I've seen many balcony railings beautifully ornamented with very intricate designs and little details that make them look so stunning. I wanted to replicate that, but it was very difficult working on such a small scale. So I opted for these heart-shaped ornaments. For that I used thin pieces of cardboard painted black and I rolled them to form these spirals. The next thing I did was covering everything in spackle, another idea that I got from Pinterest. It was actually really helpful. For one, it made all the surfaces a bit more uniform since I had to use different types of cardboard and tape, etc. It made it all have the same look. The next thing it helped with was thickness. The cardboard is really thin, even though I used the thickest one that I could find, but still cardboard is just not the right material for this project. I believe I should have used wood. I just don't know how to use wood, so I settled for what I had. And this spackle made it everything a bit more thick and solid. Another thing was giving it the right texture. The spackle is made to be used in the walls of your house, actual walls, so it helped giving my project real wall texture. And lastly, it worked as a primer. With just one coat, I was able to cover up the design of the boat, and all the things that were brown or gray also came out white. Spackle is also designed to dry really fast. In just one day, I was able to go back and sand the whole thing. And talking about priming and painting, I also took white acrylic paint and went over all the windows, the window blinds, and the door to prepare them for painting later on. And finally, we get to the last structural part of the outside of the house, and that is the roof tiles. I tried to find objects, trash, anything that had the shape of a roof tile, and I simply couldn't find anything, so I opted for creating the roof tiles from scratch. To create the shape of the roof tiles, I used makeup pens. Instead of making one tile at a time, I decided to make them in sets of 3. So I had 3 pens that were about the same size. I put them all together, leaving a gap between each other, and I put saran wrap on top of it so I could later remove it. I created the tiles using a mixture of water, flour, and white glue, and using some pieces of printed paper that I had around. Once I applied everything to the structure I had created, I removed it and let it dry for a couple days. I made like 8 or 10 of these. And the rest was very easy. I just cut it into pieces and glued them with hot glue to the roof of the house. The only thing that I had to pay attention to was making the layers overlap a little bit. So as I said, my excuse to making this miniature house was that I needed a place to put my keys when I got home. And so this is how I prepared the inside of the box for that. So the first thing was reinforcing the sides of the box with these little triangles. Then I added 6 hooks for the keys, although I do not have that many keys. I also made a little box at the bottom to put in wallets, cards, any knickknacks. I also mentioned that I wanted it to have light on the inside, and for that I just glued 2 battery-powered candles. To make sure that the box would stay closed when I wanted it to be closed, I added magnets to both parts of the house, to the box and to the door. And this is how the magnets look on the inside of the door. And this is what it looks like with lights on. This is the part where I make all the furniture to decorate the outside of the house. The materials I used were a piece of cork that I just cut into slices and 2 types of toothpicks, a flat type and a round type, and of course some more cardboard, and occasionally some little objects that I found around the house that I was able to repurpose as decoration for my project. An interesting coincidence that I wanted to tell you about is that the scale that I use for this house is almost the same that is used for Polly Pocket dolls. And I mean the Polly Pockets from the early 2000s, not the 90s. They're almost the same, at least in theory. I haven't actually tested it because I couldn't find any of my dolls. Which is weird, since I had a lot of them growing up, I just don't know where I put them. So when I was a kid, I loved playing with my Polly Pockets, especially with the houses. Setting up the houses and all the furniture, I had a lot of them, actually. Now I kind of wish that I had had the set of skills that I have right now when I was a child. I would have loved being able to create an infinite amount of furniture for my dolls. But hey, my past self would be proud of me right now. Now that I think about it, I've always loved miniature furniture, and not only because of the dolls that I had, but also the books that I read when I was little, especially the illustrated ones. There was one about a girl who found a leprechaun in her house, and she took care of him. He lived in her dollhouse, and she would make furniture and little tools and objects for the leprechaun using household objects, and that fascinated me. And here are almost all the things that I made for the house. First we have the doors and the 3 windows, the railing for the balcony, a blue bench that I made of cardboard and toothpicks, 2 chairs and a matching table, the 3 sets of window blinds that I decided to paint green, although they look blue on camera, this super cute AC unit, and the lamp you saw me working on before. I decided to add 2 beads, one on top as decoration and one on the inside to give the illusion of a light bulb. I made a smaller version of that I painted silver. I wanted to make a bunch of plants, and for the pots of the plants I used little knickknacks that I found around the house. I used I believe it's called a thimble, that protection you put on your finger for sewing. I never used it, so I didn't mind using it for my project. I gave it some legs with some toothpicks, and I also used the caps of paint tubes. I ran out of paint multiple times during this project, and at least I could make good use of the empty tubes. To make the actual plants, I followed a couple tutorials. They're basically just made out of paper. First I had to paint the paper different shades of green, and then with some scissors I cut the shapes of the leaves. Then I worked on the details of every single leaf, and then I attached all the leaves together inside the pot with some hot glue. I'm really happy with how the plants came out. I only made 3 different types of plants. I tried to make a bigger variety of plants, but they were just coming out weird. So I decided to give up for now. I've stored the extra pots that I made, and in the future I'll probably go back to this project and learn new techniques, learn new ways to make different types of plants, and finish what I've started. The types of plants that I ended up recreating, I didn't choose them randomly. They are the plants that I own, and I started owning plants only like a year ago, and I've been liking the experience very much. So the first plant that I made was this fern you just saw me make, and currently I do not have that plant. So someone had left a fully grown fern next to the trash without a pot, and when I saw it, I just couldn't leave it there. I took it home, I bought a massive pot because the plant is massive, and I left it in my dad's place, and it's currently living there. And then I made 3 spider plants. I now own 2 spider plants. They're also one of the first plants that I ever owned, and they're one of my favorite plants ever because they grow a lot, they take up a lot of space, and they're really pretty. And lastly, I made a snake plant. The snake plant that I have was the first plant that I ever bought. And I'm propagating the plant with some leaf cuts, and I'm gonna have some new snake plants in just a few more months. I made this one with cardboard instead of paper, but the technique was basically the same. So yeah, it's pretty cool that I have now miniature versions of the plants that I have in my house. And finally, after weeks of ruining my pajamas with hot glue and super glue, we get to the last part before attaching all the pieces together. And that is painting, which was also the most dreadful part of the project. I mean, mixing paints and painting is not that stressful, it's actually very relaxing. What was really dreadful was figuring out the colors that I should use and how to mix them. But for me, it's always like this. I end up wasting so much paint. I end up painting my projects over and over and over again. And this project was not an exception. The roof also did not stay the color you just saw. I decided to mix different shades of the same color and paint individually every single tile a slightly different shade of red. And it ended up looking a bit more realistic, so I'm satisfied with that. I painted the house 3 times. First, yellow, which is what you're seeing right now. Then I decided I didn't like the colors, so I wanted to make it beige. And the beige came out gray for some reason. I didn't like it, so I painted over everything yellow again, but a slightly different shade of yellow. And I decided to leave the accent parts white. The window blinds, I first painted blue, then a different shade of blue, then a different shade of blue, and then finally green, and so on and so forth. What I thought would end up looking horrible came out the best, and that was the sidewalk. I mixed up different shades of warm grays and browns and reds. I painted every single stone a different color, and it ended up looking fantastic. I promised. This is the last step, and it was attaching the door to the box. I bought the smallest hinges that I've ever seen, and I thought I could glue them with super glue. That didn't work. I ended up going back to it and attaching it with screws. That's it. I just attached all of the objects to the house, and I made a few extra things off camera, like a welcome mat, a letterbox, and a little hanging lamp. Oh, and I also added a miniature toy bag. I am finally done. Yeah, so this is the end result. I am super satisfied with the end result. The only complaint that I have is that there are not enough plants on this thing, but I've already talked about that. In the future, I will go back and add a few more plants. Surprisingly, it came out looking exactly like my sketch. I usually don't plan my projects so much ahead, and yeah. I'm really happy with the project, but don't get me wrong, I am bored of it. It's just that it took me so much longer than what I thought it would take me. I don't know if you've noticed, but at the beginning of the video, I had bangs. And I don't have them anymore because it took me 3 months to finish this thing. I worked on it on and off for 3 months, and at some points, I completely lost all motivation to go on. But it's finished. I've already hung it up with some command strips, and it's working. It is kind of functional. It's a bit fragile and it doesn't hold a lot of weight, but it's working. I already have a few keys inside. It's empty right now just because I have to balance it on my knee, but it's working so far. I really hope it stands the test of time because I'm really happy with it. And it's useful and it's cute and it's made by me, and that makes it a little bit more special. So yeah, thank you very much for watching the whole video. I'll see you next time, and I'll be making something completely different in the next video. Goodbye!